So King Charles has just confirmed the conditions for Harry's return to Britain, and the person most shocked by them isn't Harry, it's Meghan. And the reason she's shocked is that the conditions don't just apply to Harry, they apply to her, to the children, to the entire shape of what a return actually looks like, because Meghan had apparently been operating on the assumption that Harry's return would be Harry's return, that the conditions would govern him, his standing, his relationship with the institution, and that she would be peripheral to it, present but not the subject. Instead, Charles confirmed a set of conditions that reached directly into the life she and Harry built together. That defined how the whole family engages with Britain, not just the prince. And that's what shocked her, not the conditions themselves, the discovery that she was inside them. Before we go any further, two quick things. First, if you're new here, we're Crown Watch, and we break down the royal stories that actually matter, so hit subscribe. And second, if you want the details the mainstream coverage never touches, head to theroyalfiles.com. There's something on that site we don't talk about here on the channel, a hidden piece of royal history most people never find. The link is in the description. Okay, let's get into it. Here's what happened. Charles confirmed the formal set of conditions governing how Harry's presence in Britain would work. Not the emotional conditions, not the personal ones, the practical, institutional, operational conditions. And these conditions have been built over months, quietly, through the same succession planning framework that has been reshaping everything inside the palace. They covered security, which we've talked about. They covered access, meaning which parts of the institutional world Harry could and couldn't engage with. They covered public representation, meaning what Harry could and couldn't do or say in contexts that might be read as speaking for the crown. And they covered something nobody had focused on until now, the household, meaning not just Harry as an individual, but Harry as part of a family unit that includes Meghan and the children. The conditions applied to the unit, not just the person. Now let's be clear about why that matters, because the distinction is the whole story. When most people think about Harry's return, they think about one man coming home. But Harry doesn't come home alone. He comes home as a husband, as a father, as one half of a partnership that has built a public life, a business life, and a media presence on the other side of the departure. Meghan is part of that. The children are part of that. And any conditions that govern Harry's presence in Britain inevitably govern the entire household, because you can't separate the prince from the partnership. They share a public profile, they share commercial ventures, they share a media platform. What one of them does in Britain affects how the other is perceived, and Charles, in confirming the conditions, acknowledged that reality by making them apply to the household rather than just to Harry. Before we go further, real quick, if you're into deep dives on royal stories that actually sit with the complexity instead of just picking a side, hit subscribe and join us here at Crown Watch. We are building something good. Okay, back to it. Now here's why Meghan was shocked. And I want to be fair to her here because her shock was not unreasonable. Meghan had understood Harry's return as Harry's journey, his family, his institution, his relationship to repair. And she had positioned herself deliberately as the supportive wife, the partner who stands beside her husband while he navigates something deeply personal. That positioning made sense. It was respectful of Harry's relationship with his father and brother. It acknowledged that the rift was primarily between Harry and the institution, not between Meghan and the institution. And it allowed Meghan to be present without being the center of the story, which, given how often she has been placed at the center of stories she didn't choose, was a reasonable thing to want. But the conditions Charles confirmed didn't honor that positioning. They didn't treat Meghan as peripheral. They treated her as part of the household being governed, which meant the conditions reached into areas she considered her own, how the family could engage with media while in Britain, what commercial activities could or couldn't happen during visits, how the children's presence would be managed in relation to the institution. These weren't conditions about Harry standing as a prince. They were conditions about the household's conduct while on British soil. And Meghan, who had built a life specifically designed around independence from the institution, was now being told that the institution's conditions would apply to her too every time she set foot in the country. And here's the first twist, because the conditions weren't arbitrary. Every single one of them traced back to a specific problem the institution had already experienced. The media condition existed because previous visits had been accompanied by press activity that the palace couldn't control and that sometimes contradicted official messaging. The commercial condition existed because the line between Harry's personal brand and his royal identity had been blurred in ways the institution found damaging. The children's condition existed because questions about the children's titles, their security, their relationship to the institution had become flashpoints that neither side could manage cleanly. Every condition was, in effect, a lesson learned from a previous crisis, written into the framework to prevent it from happening again. Charles wasn't inventing restrictions. He was institutionalizing the answers to problems the family had already lived through. But from Meghan's perspective, that context didn't soften the impact, because Meghan hadn't been part of those institutional conversations. She hadn't sat in the rooms where the problems were discussed. She hadn't seen the process that produced the conditions. She saw only the output, a set of rules that applied to her, that limited her, that governed how she could behave in a country she had left, precisely because she felt the institution's control was suffocating. And being told years later that the institution's control would reach her even from the outside, even during visits, even after she'd built a life designed to escape it, must have felt like the very thing she'd fled catching up with her. Now here's the second twist, and this is the one that explains why Charles included Meghan in the conditions rather than limiting them to Harry alone. Because Charles had tried the Harry-only approach. Earlier drafts of the conditions had applied specifically to Harry as an individual, leaving Meghan and the children outside the framework. And those drafts failed. They failed because the advisors who tested them found that conditions applying only to Harry were unenforceable in practice. You couldn't tell Harry he couldn't do a certain kind of media engagement while Meghan, standing beside him, did exactly that engagement herself. You couldn't restrict Harry's commercial activity in Britain while the household's shared commercial platform operated without restriction. You couldn't manage Harry's public profile without managing the profile of the partnership, because the partnership was the profile. Separating them on paper didn't separate them in reality. And the institution needed conditions that worked in reality, not just on paper. That discovery is what forced the conditions to expand. Not because anyone wanted to target Meghan, because the practical reality of a shared household made individual conditions meaningless. And Charles, who understood that the conditions had to actually function, accepted the expansion reluctantly. He knew it would shock Meghan. He knew it would feel to her like the institution reaching into her life. But he also knew that conditions which only applied to Harry would be immediately rendered useless the first time the household acted as a unit in a way the conditions hadn't covered. There's an irony in this that's worth noting, because it cuts to the heart of the whole saga. Harry and Meghan left the institution to build a life together, as a partnership, as a unit. They constructed their identity around the idea that they were a team, inseparable, moving through the world as one. And that unity, which was their greatest strength in building their new life, is the very thing that made it impossible for the institution to set conditions for Harry alone. The partnership that freed them also bound them, because the institution couldn't reach Harry without reaching the partnership, and reaching the partnership meant reaching Meghan. The thing they built to escape the institution's control is the thing that brought the institution's conditions to her door. Now here's the third twist, the one that reveals what happened when Meghan actually saw the conditions. Because her shock wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. Meghan is a strategist. She thinks about positioning, about narrative, about how actions are perceived. And when she read the conditions, she didn't just feel controlled, she saw the narrative implications. Because conditions that apply to her, conditions that govern how she behaves in Britain, conditions that limit her media and commercial activity during visits, could be framed by anyone who wanted to as the institution muzzling her, controlling her, telling her how to act. And that narrative, Meghan being silenced by the palace, is the one narrative she has worked hardest to move beyond. The conditions risked resurrecting it. And that, as much as the conditions themselves, is what shocked her. Meghan reportedly pushed back through Harry. She asked whether the conditions could be restructured, to apply to Harry's institutional engagement rather than to the household's conduct. She proposed a version in which Harry's relationship with the Crown was governed by the conditions, but Meghan's personal activity remained her own, and that proposal was reasonable on its surface. It respected the distinction between the prince and the person he married. It acknowledged that Meghan was never a working royal in the way Harry was, and shouldn't be bound by the same framework. It was a clean, logical argument. And it failed for the same reason the earlier Harry-only drafts had failed. Because the distinction between Harry's institutional engagement and the household's conduct didn't hold in practice. You couldn't draw a clean line between the two because the household had spent years deliberately blurring it. That's the thing Meghan reportedly found hardest to accept. Because the blurring wasn't accidental, it was the strategy. The Sussex brand, the Netflix deals, the Spotify content, the public appearances, all of it had been built on the intersection of Harry's royal identity and the household's commercial activity. The two things were woven together by design. And now, the institution was saying that because they were woven together, the conditions had to cover both. Meghan's strategy of leveraging Harry's royal connection for the household's commercial benefit had made it impossible for the institution to separate the two when setting conditions. The very success of the strategy was now the reason the conditions reached her. Now here's where William enters, and his position was characteristically firm. William had reviewed the conditions before they were confirmed, and he had pushed for the household approach rather than the individual one. Not because William wanted to control Meghan, because William understood, from watching the last several years play out, that conditions which only applied to Harry would be immediately circumvented by the household acting as a unit. William had seen it happen. He had watched Harry bound by one set of expectations while the household operated outside them, and he was not prepared to let the next set of conditions repeat that pattern. William's insistence on the household approach was institutional, not personal, but Meghan experienced it as personal because it was her household being governed. And the gap between William's institutional logic and Meghan's personal experience is one of the fundamental gaps that has never been bridged in this family. Catherine's involvement was more careful and more empathetic than most people would expect. Because Catherine, who will one day be the institution that sets these kinds of conditions, understood something about Meghan's position that the institutional analysis missed. She understood what it feels like to have your autonomy governed by rules you didn't write. Catherine has lived inside those rules her entire royal life. She has navigated the restrictions, the protocols, the limitations on what she can say and do and wear and endorse. And while Catherine accepted those rules as the price of her position, she also understood why someone who had already left the institution would find it intolerable to be pulled back under them during visits. Catherine's empathy didn't change the conditions, but it did influence how they were communicated. She reportedly urged that the conditions be framed as mutual expectations rather than restrictions, and that the language acknowledge Meghan's independent standing rather than treating her as an extension of Harry's institutional relationship. That framing didn't change the substance, but it changed the tone. And tone in a family this wounded matters more than most people realize. And then there are the children, and this is the part that Meghan reportedly found most difficult to absorb. Because the conditions didn't just cover Harry and Meghan as adults, they covered how the household, including Archie and Lilibet, would engage with Britain. Not in a harsh way, not in a way that restricted the children's movements or imposed obligations on them, but in a way that managed their presence, that governed how their visits would intersect with the institution, that set parameters around the question that has haunted this family for years, which is what those children are in relation to the crown. Because Archie and Lilibet hold titles. They are technically a prince and a princess, and their presence in Britain, however private their parents intend it to be, carries institutional implications that the institution has to manage. The conditions address this by establishing that the children's visits would be treated as private family visits unless the household sought institutional involvement, meaning Archie and Lilibet could come to Britain and be grandchildren visiting their grandfather without any of it becoming institutional. But if the household sought any formal recognition during the visit, any public engagement, any use of the children's titles in an official context, then the institutional conditions would apply. Private stays private. But the moment it becomes institutional, the institution's rules govern it. Meghan's objection was immediate. She argued that her children should not be subject to any institutional conditions because they had not chosen to be part of the institution. They were children. They had been born into a situation they didn't create, and imposing conditions on their visits to their own grandfather's country felt to Meghan like the institution reaching across the ocean and claiming authority over children who had been deliberately raised outside of it. And that objection carries genuine moral weight. Children should not be the subjects of institutional negotiations. Children should be free to visit their grandparents without conditions attached. But the institution's response, however cold it felt, was grounded in the same reality that governed everything else. The children do hold titles. The public does know who they are. Their presence in Britain is, whether anyone likes it or not, a matter of public interest. And the institution cannot pretend it has no stake in how that interest is managed, because unmanaged public interest around royal children has historically produced chaos. The conditions weren't trying to claim the children. They were trying to ensure that when the children were in Britain, their experience was either genuinely private or properly managed, with nothing in between. Because the space in between, the unmanaged public space where royal children are visible but unprotected by institutional frameworks, is the space where things go wrong. And here's what Meghan reportedly fears most about the conditions, and it's a fear that goes deeper than any single clause. She fears the gravitational pull. She fears that every visit governed by conditions, every engagement managed by the institution, every interaction between her children and the crown, however carefully bounded, increases the connection between her family and the institution she left. She fears that the conditions are the beginning of a process that slowly, incrementally, pulls her children toward a world she deliberately chose to leave, not through a dramatic single decision, through the accumulation of small engagements, small recognitions, small moments of institutional contact that over years add up to an identity she doesn't want for them. That fear is real, and it's the unspoken thing underneath her shock. It's not about what the conditions say now. It's about what they become over time, and whether accepting them today means losing a battle she won't even see until it's too late. Now here's where Princess Anne weighed in, and her contribution was predictably direct. Anne looked at the conditions, looked at Meghan's objection, and asked a single question that cut through all of it. She asked whether the household had ever voluntarily separated its commercial activity from Harry's royal identity. The answer was no, and Anne's response was immediate. If the household had chosen to blur the line, the institution was entitled to set conditions across the blur. You cannot benefit from the connection in one direction and then refuse to be governed by it in the other. Anne's point was blunt but fair. The household had leveraged Harry's royal identity commercially. The conditions were the institutional response to that leverage. If the household wanted conditions that didn't reach Meghan, the household needed to stop using Harry's royal connection commercially. Those were the terms, and Anne, characteristically, stated them without any interest in softening them. Now here's the fourth twist, and it's the one that Charles reportedly found most difficult, because confirming the conditions meant confirming something about his relationship with Meghan that he had been avoiding. It meant acknowledging formally that Meghan was not simply Harry's wife standing beside him during a personal journey. She was part of a household that the institution had to manage. And managing her, even indirectly, meant Charles was no longer able to pretend that the relationship between himself and his daughter-in-law was purely personal. It had become institutional. And that shift from personal to institutional is the thing Charles had been hoping to avoid, because the personal relationship was the one that still had warmth in it, and the institutional one was the one that created conflict. Confirming the conditions pushed Meghan from one category into the other, and Charles understood that the push was, in some ways, irreversible. Charles reportedly tried one last time to find a version that would spare Meghan the institutional framing. He asked the advisors whether the conditions could be written in a way that acknowledged Meghan's independent standing while still governing the household's conduct. and the advisors produced a version that tried. It used language about mutual expectations. It acknowledged that Meghan held no formal institutional role. It framed the conditions as guidelines for the household's engagement with Britain rather than restrictions on any individual. But when the substance was examined, it still did the same thing. It still governed what Meghan could do during visits. It still limited media and commercial activity. It still applied to the household rather than just to Harry. The language was softer. The reality was the same. And Charles, understanding that no amount of careful wording could change the substance, confirmed the conditions as they stood. Meghan's reaction to the final confirmed conditions was, by the accounts available, a mixture of shock and resignation. Shock because the scope was wider than she'd expected. Resignation because the logic behind the scope was, however unwelcome, undeniable, the household had been built as a unit. The conditions had to cover the unit. And Meghan, who is nothing if not a realist when the facts are clear, understood that fighting the scope would be fighting the structure of the life she and Harry had built together. The very thing that had made them powerful as a unit was now the thing that made her subject to conditions she hadn't anticipated. And here's the final twist, the one that nobody saw coming and that changes what you think this story is about. Because buried in the conditions, in a section that dealt with future visits rather than the immediate return, was a clause that offered something unexpected. The clause said that if the household chose, at any point, to formally separate its commercial activity from Harry's royal identity, to draw a clean, documented, verifiable line between the Sussex brand and the prince's connection to the crown, then the conditions governing Meghan's personal activity during visits would be reviewed and potentially narrowed. In other words, there was a way out. But the way out required Meghan and Harry to do the one thing they had never been willing to do, which was to give up the commercial value of Harry's royal connection. The conditions didn't just govern the household, they offered it a choice. Keep the royal connection commercially and accept the conditions that come with it, or give up the commercial connection and gain the freedom from the conditions. The institution wasn't just setting rules, it was offering a trade. And the terms of that trade are what Meghan is reportedly still processing. That clause is extraordinary because it turns the entire relationship between the Sussexes and the institution into a transaction with clear terms. For years, the central tension has been that Harry and Meghan want to use the royal connection commercially while being free of the institution's control. The conditions, and specifically that clause, say that arrangement is no longer available. You can have the connection, or you can have the freedom, but you cannot have both. Choose, and the fact that Charles built that choice into the conditions, rather than simply imposing restrictions without an exit, shows a sophistication that most people wouldn't credit him with. He's not just governing the household, he's forcing it to decide what it actually wants. And that forced choice may be the most significant thing Charles has done in this entire saga. Because for the first time, the question isn't what the institution will allow, it's what Harry and Meghan are willing to give up. And here's a dimension that nobody has written about yet, which is what Harry experiences watching Meghan process these conditions. Because Harry left the institution to protect her. That's the story he told. He left because the institution was damaging the woman he loved, and he chose her over it. That narrative defined their departure and has defined their life since. And now the institution's conditions have followed them. They've reached across the distance Harry created and landed on Meghan's lap. And Harry has to sit with the knowledge that the thing he left to protect her from has, through the conditions of his own return, found her again. Not because anyone was targeting her, because the household he and Meghan built together, the shared identity, the blurred line between prince and brand, made it impossible for the conditions to reach him without also reaching her. Harry's choice to leave was supposed to free Meghan from the institution. The conditions of his return prove it didn't. And that irony, the discovery that the very partnership he built to escape the institution is the thing that brought the institution's conditions back to his wife, is the thing that Harry is reportedly struggling with most. He didn't just bring Meghan into a family. He brought a family back into the reach of the system he swore he'd left behind. Nobody celebrated. Charles confirmed the conditions with the weariness of a man who had been looking for a version of this that didn't hurt anyone and couldn't find one. William accepted the conditions with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose institutional logic had held. Catherine felt the human cost even as she supported the institutional need. Anne stated the obvious and moved on. And Meghan sat with the choice the conditions had placed in front of her, the trade she hadn't expected, the realization that the life she and Harry had built on the intersection of royal identity and commercial independence had created the very conditions she now had to live with. So here's where I hand it to you. Was Charles right to confirm conditions that reached Meghan, not just Harry? Is the household approach fair, given that the household has operated as a unit since the departure? Is the trade-off clause, give up the commercial connection and gain freedom from the conditions, a genuine offer of autonomy, or the most elegant trap the institution has ever built? Should Meghan accept the conditions and the identity they impose, or should she and Harry take the trade? Give up the commercial value of the royal connection and gain the freedom that comes with truly letting go? There is no clean answer, and anyone who hands you one quickly hasn't sat with the full weight of it. The conditions are confirmed, the choice is on the table, and the family that left the institution to build something independent has just discovered that independence has a price, and the institution has finally named it. The price isn't money, it isn't status, it's the royal connection itself, the thing that made the Sussex brand valuable, the thing that made the Netflix deal possible, the thing that made the whole independent life commercially viable. Give it up and gain the freedom. Keep it and accept the conditions. That's the trade. And the brilliance of it, or the cruelty of it, depending on where you stand, is that the institution didn't have to take anything from Meghan. It just had to name the cost of what she was keeping. And the cost, once named, can never be unheard. When the next chapter moves, you already know where to look for the parts nobody else will tell you. The next chapter of this family is still being written, and when it moves, we will be here to talk about it. If this video made you see any part of this story differently, drop your position in the comments. I read every one of them. And on a question this complicated, I genuinely want to know where you land. Subscribe if you are not already with us, because the next chapter is coming, and it is going to be one worth watching.